All right, everybody, welcome back to the Vault. My name is Jesse Storr. I'm here with Alex Garcia. And what we want to be bringing you guys today, we just want to have a little conversation about cues in terms of, when you're actually lifting in the gym, things that will make not only the movement a little bit easier in terms of how to actually engage correctly the muscle fibers that you want to engage and the local muscle you want to engage, but also to just make things a little bit more simple so that that is a little bit easier for you to do. So, what I think is a good one to start with, Alex, is maybe just a back squat. What are some let's
Mhm.
just start with you first.
Yes.
What are some good cues for the back squat that you think anybody can add to the squat right now and make it better?
Well, I think that there's definitely a lot of things to think about, honestly, with the squat because there's a lot of people out there with different, anatomical leverages. So, you're going to have some people who are better at hinging and some people who can, get a lot of knee flexion naturally. So, I feel like depending on how you squat, right? If you're doing a high bar squat, for example, I would definitely, first of all, train high bar squats because it's going to help you if you struggle with knee flexion, even if you have to do some kind of heel elevation. But some of the cues that I would use most of the time are, first of all, getting that bracing breath, getting a really solid brace going into the eccentric of the movement. So before you start the movement, you've already braced your core. And then with squats, like hip engagement's really important. So one cue that I really like to use is, you know, pull the floor apart, and that helps you kind of you use your feet to grab the almost grab the floor and help you create that tension in your hips so that when you start that movement into the descent, you've got lots of stability. And those two cues are probably like two of the biggest ones I'll always highlight. But what about you? What are some of your cues for squats?
Yeah, I think for me, probably the second one you just use, kind of trying to separate the floor or at least grounding yourself is kind of the one that I use is like just almost like gripping the floor, like you said, like with your feet. So either I'll
Hmm.
squat barefoot or just with socks on, or you try to go for a really flat shoe, obviously. But I think the cue I don't like the most, I think, is maybe not the most, but just one cue that I think is just oversold is the whole keeping the weight back on the heels. And when I remember when
Yes.
I first started squatting, a lot of people kept saying that, and I'm like, dude, it feels like I'm sitting back into it a little bit deeper, but it always just felt a little off. And then once I got it in my mind to just keep my entire foot centered, basically, like just like equally distribute that weight on the foot and keep the entire foot like grounded, my squat became so much better and I could lift so much more because I think you feel a
Oh
lot more
yeah.
stable as well. So I think
Yes.
literally just driving the feet into the ground, making sure you get a really, really good foundation. And then, dude, I mean, bracing is something in itself. I'm sure that you can attest the same. Once you added that into it, that gave you another level of stability, which gave you another level of strength as well. So I think, dude, I
Yes.
think those are probably honestly my top two as well between like the bracing and things that again people can do right now and make their squat better. The bracing and then staying grounded and having the weight equally distributed between the feet as you are
Yeah.
actually driving up on the squat. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So here's a question for you then. Like, if somebody were just wanting to start squatting tomorrow, what are the two cues that you would say you would, give a complete beginner, somebody who is just starting out, has never touched the barbell before?
Okay. So usually if people can get this in their head, then the rest of the squat becomes a little
Hmm.
bit easier. And I would say having like the relationship between getting the hips back and driving the knees forward at the same time. Now, like I said, it's just about, especially with a new person, making it as simple as possible. So once you kind of
Hmm.
explain what a hip hinge is and you go through, the whole like RDL or hip, extension movement of that, and then they kind of see, okay, so when the hips go away from the midline, once they kind of understand that and they're able to kind of visualize that, then you just tell them now just try to drive the knees forward as you have the hips go down. And then you end up, being able to go down with the weight basically
Create
equally
that
distributed
center.
from
Yeah, over
exactly
that
over
forefoot.
from
Hmm.
exactly. So from the anterior and posterior is kind of what I was saying. But yeah, man, I mean, that's probably the biggest thing I would say is just that once you get that timing down about getting the hips back and the knees going forward at the same time, you end up sitting really
Hmm.
good. And then from there, you can work on some of the other cues when you start lifting heavier and weight, like, grounding yourself and the bracing and things like that to just be able to make your squat better.
I
But
have personally found when I'm training clients too that, one thing that you guys can really work on like at any point in time with or without heavy weight is like control, just tempo, maybe like a pause of some kind. Pausing at the bottom is always going to, pausing with a lighter weight, or taking a certain percentage of your working weight that you do for 8 reps and doing, maybe a fewer reps, but doing some pauses to help you develop that control and stability. And, starting that way and then having progressive overload with that over the course of weeks, that's going to help your squat tremendously as well. But, that's where the cues really make a difference, like bracing, like when you want maximum tension in the bottom of the squat. So, that's why I say the brace is the most important, because it really is what holds it all together and helps you, stay tight. And I think that's probably one of the things I say the most. Like you'll probably hear me in multiple videos say that, like, stay tight, because that's just pretty much how it is. Like that's how you should, take that breath in and try to think of it like
yeah,
you're glue, like you're holding yourself together as you go down into the hole.
yeah, no, I
But
agree.
yeah, the
And
pauses
I guess
definitely make a big difference.
Yeah, and I guess I didn't officially say this like distinctively at least, but we're focusing more on legs today, just to kind of give that out there because I don't think I
Hmm.
said it, but we're focused on leg movements today. So squat is the first one we're kind of tackling. And the last point I'll make on squat before we can maybe move on to another one is
Hmm.
usually, and this goes for obviously like everything else in the gym as well, but especially on squat, usually if you do not feel stable going down on the squat, like on the eccentric, then you need to either go a little bit lighter and really work on negatives, like Alex is saying,
Hmm.
or again, there's something else going on there with you not bracing, maybe, or something of, or maybe the again, like the weight not being equally distributed on the feet. Something's going on there that you need to check before you end up trying to go up and weight. That's the number one thing
Yes,
I'll
dude.
actually say as well.
Yes. Oh, you know what? I'm gonna add to that, dude. That what like the thing about that too is like it's sometimes a mobility issue. So sometimes the work that you need to do, it like is related more to, finding the right like movement patterns that help you unlock certain areas that you may be weak in, Like I know that once I got my hamstring to turn to my squat, because I have to send my hips back a lot because of the length of my legs. But, that's another thing I've been working with too, is just, doing heel elevation. And I think that the type of shoes really matter when you're squatting, guys. Like, don't wear like a pair of Asics or Hokas or something like that.
Yeah, nah.
Get some flat shoes, because you're going to
Mm-hmm.
get more stability. And if you're not good with flat shoes, then get some lifting shoes. They have lifting shoes, but you still have to keep applying those cues, like tensing your core, making sure your hips are stable before you let the weight go down, and things like that. Even though you have shoes on, shoes do make it easier to get some depth, because if you're somebody that struggles with ankle like dorsiflexion, things of that nature. But that's why you should work on your mobility right there, because you don't want to create a necessity out of, you not training a certain way. Like mobility is a wide ranging thing, obviously, but if you can take certain aspects of your squat and put them put them like through a warm up phase, you can improve the quality of your squat each session by doing mobility right before. Like that's something I have worked a lot with clients in, the last couple of years. Really, I've just been focusing a lot on squat mobility right before we squat. That, like, do the things that you would do in the squat and work on, like the deep squat is one of them for sure. Sitting in a deep squat right before, because it warms up that bottom position. But yeah, anyways, squatting, we could probably just make a whole video about squatting, man.
Yeah, not to
Squatting is
be
just like,
honest.
it's
Yeah.
just, it
I was
really
gonna
is.
ask you,
But
I mean, out of
that,
all the exercises, do you think squatting is the hardest to teach in the beginning?
it's hard to teach for some people. If you're short though, it's
Yeah,
pretty easy.
it is. And I think it, yeah, it
It
just depends. I
depends.
think in general, it's such like a natural
I think if
movement,
you have
but
tight hips, it's really tough.
yeah, tight hips or
I had
tight
one
ankles is tough.
client
Yeah,
who I had one client who would literally just to squat, she had to lean all the way over. And it's
like
like
an
we got to
extreme
get
low
to a
bar
point.
squat.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
we had to work a lot on some hip mobility, and it takes time, man. You got to
Mm-hmm.
consistently do it. That's the thing I'll say the most about it. That's why you should incorporate it in your warm up before you squat, because it's about the consistency of it. If you only do it every once in a while, it doesn't really do anything,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
like most
Man,
things.
man, let's talk
You
about
know, it's like having
Bulgarians.
protein one day. Yes.
Yeah, right. You gotta
Oh
keep doing it,
man.
keep doing it. But
Oh,
let's I want to talk about Bulgarians and lunges because
Bulgarians.
this is one that do like so much is left on the table when a lot of people do these because the weight is not centered where it should be. So if I'm doing a Bulgarian or
Mm-hmm.
if I'm doing a lunge, it doesn't matter. All of my weight needs to be on the focus on the leg that I'm trying to focus on that front leg. So if my
Yes.
foot is on the
Yes.
bench and my other leg is on the ground, I should not be equally distributed. And I should be pushing off the bench as well. I
No.
should be literally like almost trying to put like all my posture
Mm-hmm.
where I'm leaning almost over that front leg a little bit as I
Right.
go down, and you're trying to load that up. And as long as you maintain that weight being right on that front leg and don't let that shift at all, then you're gonna get the most out of it. The same thing with the lunge. When I go to a lunge and I step out, all my weight needs to be forward on that front leg. So that when I transition to the other leg, it's really like I could pick that back leg up. Like it's really just there to help me balance. It's not there to help me actually do the movement. And that's something that I like, even, when I first start working with clients, I'm like, oh, I feel that way more than I did before. Or, oh, that's way harder. And it's like,
Well,
yeah, I mean,
yeah, dude. I mean, the single leg movements are, you know, like single leg movements are so beneficial to you. They will help you uh, work on your muscle imbalances, help you develop better core stability, like a lot of beautiful things with the single leg movement. So you don't want to, bastardize it by just putting a bunch of weight on that back leg for sure. And I think one thing that a lot of people do with the Bulgarians is they put their foot a little too high because then they're like so far, like that foot is so high that they're just kind of leaning back into it and just getting a stretch on this
mm-hmm,
leg. And it's like,
mm-hmm,
I mean, that is you are actually training a muscle doing that, but that's the thing is like why are we spending energy doing that when we could be doing
mm-hmm,
more, maybe like knee flexion, like I try to prioritize like some knee flexion because I know I'm going to get a ton of glutes when I do Bulgarians, like Bulgarians are like one of those things. It's like it's a, you're getting your hip down parallel to the floor.
mm-hmm,
If you can get your quad parallel with the floor, you're definitely going to get some glute activation. So I prioritize doing knee flexion recently, and I just put my foot a little bit lower
mm-hmm.
um,
And
on the platform.
yeah, and to add to that, there's like a weird kind of cue that I have since we're talking a little bit like kind of like cues that work.
Cues.
Um, it really doesn't matter what it is. It's most compound movements that at least involves like the major joints, like elbow, like the elbow and knee. But when you're on a squat or if you're doing a Bulgarian, if you think about it more as like joint displacement, so to speak, in terms of getting the knee away from the midline and then kind of again
Yes.
focusing on getting that knee back to the midline as you're actually coming up. It becomes almost like a knee extension or like a leg extension, like a knee extension when you're doing like
Mm-hmm.
the leg extension machine. And when you kind of think about it that way, you really do get more of the quad to fire than not. And it's crazy, like just making that little switch in the way that you think about doing the movement. The
Yep.
movement itself is not that much different, really, but it's okay. Now I'm focused on really squeezing on the quad and trying to get my knee back to that position where now it's working as a leg extension almost or a knee extension. Same thing. Like we'll kind of talk
Yes.
about when we get to like push movements when you're doing with like chest and
Mm-hmm.
triceps. But when you focus a little bit more on that, it's crazy
Mm-hmm.
how again you simplify the movement and just say, okay, all I want to do is just straighten my knee, bend my knee, straighten my knee, bend my knee while I'm squeezing my quads.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll recognize like, okay, I didn't make it so complicated as all these other things. That's why I say like cues have to be simple
Mm-hmm.
enough because I don't know if you told me this or somebody else who kind of brought it up, but it's like your body doesn't know how to engage the specific muscle fibers you're telling to engage, but doing something simple like just focusing more on bending and extending at the knee, whether you're doing a hamstring curl or leg
Yes.
extension,
Mm-hmm.
is very simple to tell
Right.
yourself to do for you to be able to actually
Oh,
do it. So that's why
absolutely.
the cues are so important because that's what has your body kind of autonomously almost doing these things as a, indirect result of that simple cue that you just gave it. It's not like you're telling your body again, like
Yes,
contract these specific muscle fibers, but as a result of you doing some of
dude.
those simple
Well,
cues, that's what happens, right?
that's I have to agree with you, bro. I have to agree with you, and I have to add, like, the actually, I forgot to add that, like, an honorable mention for the squat cue is knees out, and that I can we can take that same methodology over to the Bulgarian in some aspects, and also, like, if you were just doing a single leg squat, you'd want to practice just getting your knee tracking over the second and third toe. I just try to tell people track that knee out, track knee out. And when I do things like warm them up with something like a kettlebell weight shift, right, I can get more of that abduction and
Mhm.
activation to register for them. And then
Man,
after we practice, do a couple of warm up sets, we are potentiating
hmm
movement to be better.
hmm
And I think that's one thing that's awesome about the Bulgarians is they are a potentiation movement for squatting, in my opinion. Like, when you do a Bulgarian split squat, you are basically, you know, defining your working capacity because you're able to do, let's say, like, if you can do like 50, like hold 50s on each leg, 100 on each leg, like, squatting is going to be, from a stability standpoint, better. Like, you
hmm
can really see a lot of the benefits from doing a single leg squat, and that's why I think, like, the squat and the single leg squat, if you incorporate those, you will definitely see noticeable changes in your overall leg musculature, really, like, because
Yeah.
it's those two. Like, I've always thought single leg squatting has to be incorporated. You're missing out if you're not getting a single leg squat in.
Yeah, no, for sure. You got to train
And the
unilaterally because that's how
just
you're
go
gonna.
go in there for sure.
Yeah, that's just how you're gonna get rid of some of those muscle imbalances as well between right and left limbs. Is just doing unilateral stuff. You just have to. But even you talked a little bit about warming up. I do want to
Yes.
do a later segment just talking about like even like warm ups with different movements and what's the best way to warm up. But
Oh,
let's talk a little bit
absolutely.
about well before we move on, I guess are there any cues you have even for something as simple as leg extension? I know I have like a couple like weird cues that really allowed me to engage my quad a lot.
Mm,
But I want to ask you first, are there any cues that you have for even leg extension that work well for you?
yes. Yes, I have recently tried some leg extension cues from there's this guy I follow named Eugene Teo. I mean, everybody probably knows him. Eugene Teo's
Mm-hmm.
a great guy. Um, he's very knowledgeable. And he talked about how the leverage for the quad, you actually can gain even more leverage for the quad, the rectus femoris, when you lean back. So I started leaning back more on my leg extensions and noticing that I could get a little bit more of the
On the
top of
top
my
of the
quad
quad.
right here.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and like, it's really just helping me develop my overall quadriceps musculature. But another cue that I use is pointing the toes. I point the toes forward. I actually practice pointing toes, and sometimes I'll flex the foot. I tend to flex the
Mm-hmm.
foot on the leg curl, but I'll
Mm-hmm.
point the toes on the leg extension.
Okay.
And then, yeah, and then, keeping tempo, really. Like, I don't want to swing the weight around. I want to try to control the eccentric. So I'm always thinking 3, 2, 1 on the way down, or 1, 2, 3, whatever. Probably three,
Mm-hmm.
two, one. Probably sounds better. But I just try to focus on the feel of it, really. Like, leg extensions are one of those movements, like, you don't want to, like, overdo it with the weight. It's just about having good control and then progressively overloading over time.
Yeah, I have a I both I've flex and point the toe as well. I just kind of
Mm,
switch it up a little bit. There's different ways and techniques you can get out of the leg extension. Like you can almost like start with the knees a little bit more out and then roll the knees in. You can do the same thing with opening up, and that can hit
yeah,
kind of the outer
get a
and
little bit
inside
of
of
hip.
the
Yeah.
exactly, and even different placements of the feet. Like keeping the feet out will hit a little bit more of like the outside of the quad, and keeping the feet turned like this, like
Mm-hmm.
where the feet are basically pointed out, will hit a little bit more of the inside. So there's different ways you can play with it that way, but one weird cue I found recently was as you especially as you get to the top of the leg extension, trying to push that foot
Mm-hmm.
out as well to really make that leg straighten all the way, you get just a little bit more on that quad. It's weird, and I don't even know how I ended up doing it the other day or
Mm-hmm.
why that happened, but it's almost like I said, like the leg is coming up, and then as it's coming up, you're almost like pushing out a little bit as well because it straightens the knee
Mm-hmm.
just a little bit more. So I would try that even if
Mm-hmm.
I was you, next time you do leg extensions, just
Oh
see if it
yeah,
works for you. But I'm just
for
curious because
sure.
everybody has so many different weird cues that work for them that, again, it's some of the most simple things sometimes, and you're like, damn, I feel
Mm-hmm.
that so much more. So yeah, I was kind of interested about
Yep.
that. But what do you think about hamstrings? You got any leg curl cues that work for you? Again, another simple movement, but
Leg
anything that you
curl
think might
cues.
make somebody else's leg curl
Well,
better.
one thing I like to do is warm. I like to warm them up first off. Like I need to warm them up a considerable amount because they get tight over the course of a day. So I'm constantly like doing some things to just lengthen them out a little bit. Obviously, I don't want to like do much static stretching. I focus mostly on dynamic stuff. But once I one thing I do on the floor to get them activated and like a body weight movement is I'll just get in like I'll get some sliders, and if I'm on the turf and I put them under my heels, and I'll just curl my feet towards my butt as
Mm-hmm.
many times as I can, and I usually get a good little pump from that. But that just
Mm-hmm.
helps me like get my mind some blood flowing to the area first.
Mm-hmm.
And then it depends too. When I do a seated leg curl, man, the seated leg curl, that thing has helped me a lot. And I would say one thing that the seated leg curl really does well for me is like when I can hinge into it. That's
Mm-hmm.
probably one of the biggest cues that has helped me like define, like get more definition of my hamstrings and just honestly mobilize them too. Like being able to hinge forward into it, kind of just like a sit, almost like a sit and reach stretch. And then you
Mm-hmm.
bring it up at the top and it's just like pulling you, but it's a good
Mm-hmm.
stretch. And if over time it gets stronger. And like now I don't have as much pain when I stretch my hamstrings. And that's one thing that the seated leg curl really does well for me. I always try to get it touched all the way back on the seated leg curl. Like focus on the full range of motion of the machine. Try not
Mm-hmm.
to leave anything on the table there. That's what I say. Like you don't want to, start going into one of those things where you're just getting like partial reps because I don't really when it comes to like leg stuff, I want to focus on getting as many full range of motion reps as I can and maximizing my leverages. Like I want to make sure that I'm getting full range of motion on every rep. So I focus very hard on getting it to touch all the way back. And then especially with hamstrings, just like it's like the bicep of the leg. So if you want to focus on that lowering phase, that eccentric right there at the end, because that's where you're going to get the most muscle fiber recruitment. And also getting a pause at the top never hurts. And that's the thing is like after a while you just start to train like that. Like I started training like that because it's safer. It's honestly having that pause where you just do a pause at the top, it just keeps you more honest with the weight. And that's something I adopt on a regular basis with my training. I know some people are probably just kind of going through the motions, repping things out, but I'm always trying to be conscious of getting good control of the weight and not letting the weight just dictate my movement. But yeah, like what do you think about what would you say you like better, the lying leg curl or the seated leg curl?
I like the seated leg curl because I can load it up heavier, but the lion leg curl,
Yeah.
like the prone leg curl machine, it just hits it different, man. It's just a little different, honestly. I like to incorporate them both, and
Yeah.
one that I do like personally, just because I don't have a prone machine curl here, is like a floor dumbbell
Mm-hmm.
curl, and that lights my hamstrings up because it's
Yeah.
basically the same thing, but just adding that dumbbell
Nice.
in. And dude, I mean, you
It's like
wouldn't really
free
think,
too.
yeah, you wouldn't really think it would kill you that much, but man, it really lights the hamstrings up. But even
Man,
when
them
I'm doing like the
hamstrings
seated,
though, bro, they burn.
oh, dude, yeah, that's one of the worst. It's probably not as worse as bad as quads. Like when you get that quad burn, especially like in the
Quads, yeah.
leg extension or something, man, that's different. But a cue that works for me, at least with like the seated hamstring curl, like a
Mm-hmm.
couple of them in particular, is when I'm actually going down, like when I'm actually curling the weight down, kind of pushing my hips up just a little bit
Mm-hmm.
to be able to hopefully kind of ignite a little bit more knee flexion. That's my hope there. Now, pulling
Mm-hmm.
yourself really tight down in the seat can maybe do that as well if it just provides you some more stability. But that's where you're going to have to kind of see what works for you a
Mm-hmm.
little bit better right there. And then also just having
Yes.
my heels a little bit more in. So instead of having my feet just straight, I'll kind of like, especially as I'm curling the weight down, I'll kind of force my heels in and my feet out just a little bit. And I notice I get a little bit more hamstring
Mm.
contraction there as well. So those are a couple little
Interesting.
small ones that, you might want to try that could, give you just a little bit more. But I think
Oh
honestly,
yeah.
stability is probably the biggest thing. The more stable you are, the more weight you move. And if you keep it as simple as, again, just
Yes.
bending at the knee and just squeezing on the hamstring as hard as you can, that's really all you need to
Mm-hmm.
do, especially in like a seated hamstring
Mm-hmm.
curl or even the prone hamstring curl, to be honest.
Yes. Oh, and there are standing leg curls. There's like a standing single leg curl. Those
Hmm.
hit pretty good too, actually.
Yeah.
I do
And I
enjoy
actually
using those.
have
Any
you
standing leg curl
seen
variation? You
now I was gonna have you seen like the monkey feet straps where like you can like attach like a dumbbell to like the back of your heel essentially,
Oh
and you
yeah.
can do like hamstring curls that way
Yeah.
as well.
No, those
So
are
I
I
was
would
actually
actually
thinking
love
about
to
getting
get
some.
those because of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean you can really load a
Yeah,
hamstring,
because
like
on
you
the
can load it up
go
a lot.
hamstring work.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Hmm.
Um
Oh yeah,
what's
dude.
another
And
one? What about
honestly,
like
hamstring
RDL?
work is underrated.
No, it really
RDLs.
is. Yeah.
RDLs.
But what about RDLs? I think
Oh
that's
man.
another one that it's pretty simple, but I think again, like there's so many little like weird cues or and when I say RDO, I mean either RDO or straight leg deadlift, kind of lumping those into the same, that hip hinge and getting a good stretch in the hamstrings. And I guess the glutes as well. But what do you think is a good cue that works for you that either you give to all your clients or you kind of think about every single time you do a RDL that really makes you kind of connect with that movement?
Well, one cue that I will always stand by with the RDL is the again just the bracing of the core, like just getting your breath, making sure that you create intra abdominal pressure, so that your spine is in a stable position. Um, that's probably the number one thing because we just want to limit spinal movement in that actual you know, pattern. We want to focus on pushing the hips back. So I just think hips back, breath. That's kind of like two cues right there, but that's the main thing. Like I just try to focus on keeping it as strict a hinge as possible, trying to move only about the hips, not focusing too much on knee bent. Like we don't want our knees moving up and down, right? I want to focus on getting that movement about the hips and getting a solid brace so that when you get into that position, you feel the tension properly.
Mm. No, it's interesting. Because I do my RDLs are a little different when I do them, especially when I coach them. It's well, more specifically again, like the straight leg deadlift one is more specifically for the hamstrings. If it's for the
Mm-hmm.
glutes and it's just like a regular RDL, yes, all I'm focused on is getting the hips back and hinging as much as I can. Once I get to that full or maximum point of extension and I can't go any further back with the hips, then I'll stop there and then come back up if it's for glutes. But especially for people who are a little bit more flexible, maybe, and even especially if you don't have a setup to really do like a deficit straight leg deadlift. One thing you could do that's simple to add a little bit more stretch and put a little bit more
Mm-hmm.
tension on the hamstrings is as you go down and the hips get back, you're going to have a little bit of bend in the knee. And you want to just protect the knee and keep the knee safe, especially being under a heavy load at the bottom like that. First thing you need to do as you're going down that I always coach is keep the bar or the dumbbells as close to the body as possible because that's going to really
Yes.
put a heavy stretch being a little bit closer to the hamstrings as you go down on the hamstrings.
Mm-hmm.
And your lower back does not have to kick in as much to try to keep that weight from going forward, right? So that's one thing I'll say.
Yes.
Um, Secondly, once you get to the bottom, especially once I get the bar basically past my knees, what I usually do here, especially the further I go down the shin, is I'll start to extend at the knee just a little bit. And that'll give me a little bit more because again, like my knee is basically going to end up kind of extending a little bit, making my leg a little bit more straight,
Yes.
which is going to put a little bit more stretch on that hamstring. So when I'm already in the loaded position, that's when I'll add a little bit of knee extension, kind of hold it there for a second, maximize that tension for a
Mm-hmm.
second, and then I'll let the knee kind of go back to that soft bend and bring the weight back up. So that's just a way to be able to get a little bit more stretch, especially at the maximally loaded position when you're at that lengthening that
Right.
maximally lengthened phase, so to speak, at the bottom. That's a way to just add some in at the end. Yeah, literally,
Mm-hmm.
again, just like a second or two. You get to the bottom rep, a little bit of knee extension, you feel a little bit more load on the hamstrings, and then you can add that soft bend back in and come back up. It's something that's a little bit more
Yeah.
complicated, but once you actually, kind of get the rhythm and I coach somebody into it, they all say
Well,
the same thing,
yeah,
that they
I
feel a little bit
think
more
that
stretch.
that seated leg curl, that cue that I was telling you about, is kind of like similar to that. Like there's that last little bit of knee extension. I flex the quad
Mm-hmm.
at the top of the leg curl, and that
Mm,
helps me get that extra knee extension. I think that could be a segue into your straight leg deadlift or your RDL,
yeah.
because it can just help you develop that mind muscle connection pre exercise. You can kind of periodize it how you want. And I think that's one thing too, is like we can mimic some of the movements that we do in other ways and in other variations. So it's important when you do these movements that every 4 weeks you're changing something about the way you do the movement in terms of like your variation. Like either you're gonna switch up your sets and reps, or you're going to add like a pause, or you're going to add some kind of eccentric, depending on what your goals are. Obviously, if you're trying to get stronger, then you'll probably want to start, pyramiding up towards, a certain amount of weight. But it depends on what phase you are in the macro cycle, really, like throughout the year. Depends on when you're competing, all things to consider. But when it comes to training legs and getting the most out of your you know movements, like using pairing movements like the leg curl and the RDL, like that's a win right there. Like you're gonna get so much out of the movements, mind muscle connection wise. And like when it comes to you know developing muscle over time, like leg curls are something that are easier to progressively overload. And there are going to be times where you're going to hit um, some plateaus, because one thing about RDLs is it's a full body movement. There's lats involved. There's your upper body. If you want your lower body movements to get better, you also have to consider that your upper body can be a limiting factor in you being able to perform an RDL, right? So like there have to be phases of your training that you go through where you focus on strengthening your upper body. And maybe you do that with through accessory work. Maybe you just focus on doing better technique with the RDL, or you do both. There's a lot of ways to go about it. But I would say that the one of the things that like a lot of people don't consider is that when you plateau, maybe you need to focus on things that fatigue out kind of faster, like your lats. Your lats can fatigue out through like when you're doing like sets of RDLs. So strengthening those, maybe doing some holds to help you get better at keeping those lats tight in the movement can help you rep out better, get better results.
Yeah. Well, I think that's some good information. I mean, I think my last kind of closing remark is just if you pay attention, like the more you pay attention in the gym, again, I think we touched on this last week, but just being intentional, kind of just being present, knowing, why you're
Mm-hmm.
doing what you're doing. That's how you can actually start, developing some cues of your own that really help, because you'll start recognizing, oh, this little small tweak ends up making me feel this movement, 10% more, or this little thing here makes me feel this or connect with this a little bit more, or dang, I feel like I'm,
Right.
contracting the muscle a lot more, whatever the case may be. Sometimes it's very, very small, and sometimes you don't really, or usually. All right. Yeah, that was my bad. Computer died, and it said we're about to go on a low battery, bro. And I sat there and looked at it and just forgot to change it. But anyways, last little
It
bit
just
I was
died.
saying, it literally just died. I'm like, dang. But just pay attention when
It
you're in the
wasn't even
gym.
the
Just
meeting time this time.
it wasn't right,
It
and that's what I was thinking. But nah. But
wasn't the
yeah, just
meeting.
just pay attention in the gym. I think that's all we're really trying to say. That's how you're going to get a lot of these cues and all the cues for yourself that'll work for you.
Yeah.
But I know we got to get up out of here now. So again, subscribe, like, share, comment. We're getting better with it. We're kind of figuring
Yes,
things out.
sir.
But I'm liking the way things are going. So, you got anything you want to say, Alex, before we get up out of here?
Um, well, I will say, guys, just make sure get to the gym this week and eat your protein, baby. Let's go.
Eat your protein. Be consistent. One day at a time. Do all that. All
Hmm.
right.
Yes,
But yeah,
sir.
man, we'll be back next week talking about some more cues for some other body parts. We'll figure that out then. But yeah, man, I'll see you next week.
Let's do it. All right,
All right,
sounds
man.
good. Peace out.